The scalding coffee hit Marcus Williams' custom-tailored suit like liquid fire, spreading across the charcoal fabric in a dark stain that would have cost most people a month's salary to replace. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft drip of coffee from his sleeve onto the marble floor of the executive conference room. Every eye in the room turned to witness what they assumed would be an explosion of rage from one of the most powerful men in corporate America. But what happened next would shatter their assumptions about power, dignity, and what it truly means to be human. If you've ever wondered how a single moment can reveal the character of a person and transform an entire workplace culture, stay with me, because what Marcus did in response to this accident will challenge everything you think you know about leadership and compassion. The woman who had spilled the coffee stood frozen beside the mahogany conference table, her hands trembling as she clutched the empty silver tray that moments before had held a pristine white porcelain cup. Maria Santos was barely 5 feet tall, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun beneath the simple black uniform that marked her as part of the building's invisible workforce. At 62 years old, she had been cleaning offices for over 30 years, moving through corporate spaces like a ghost, acknowledged only when something went wrong. Her dark eyes were wide with terror as she stared at the spreading stain on Marcus's jacket, knowing that this single mistake could cost her the job she desperately needed to support her disabled grandson. The conference room itself was a monument to corporate power, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline and a table that could seat 20 of the city's most influential business leaders. The morning sun streamed through the glass, casting long shadows across the faces of the executives who had gathered for the quarterly board meeting of Williams Financial Group, the investment firm that Marcus had built from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. These were people accustomed to wielding power over others, to making decisions that affected thousands of lives with the casual indifference of those who had never known real struggle. Marcus felt the hot liquid seeping through his shirt to his skin, but his expression remained calm as he assessed the situation. He could see the fear in Maria's eyes, the way her shoulders hunched as if preparing for a blow, and he recognized something in her posture that took him back to his own childhood in Detroit, when his mother had worked 3 jobs to keep their family afloat. The scent of the spilled coffee mixed with the faint smell of industrial cleaning supplies that clung to Maria's uniform, a reminder of the countless hours she spent making these offices pristine for people who rarely acknowledged her existence. "I'm so sorry, sir," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible as she began to reach for the napkins on the table. "I'm so sorry. Please, I can clean this up. I can pay for the dry cleaning. Please don't fire me." The desperation in her voice cut through Marcus like a blade, and he could see the other executives exchanging glances that ranged from amusement to impatience. Richard Blackwood, the firm's chief operating officer, was already reaching for his phone, probably to call building security to have Maria removed. Jennifer Walsh, the head of human resources, wore the expression of someone calculating the liability implications of the incident. These were people who viewed service workers as interchangeable parts in a machine, easily replaced when they malfunctioned. Marcus raised his hand slightly, a gesture that immediately commanded attention and stopped Richard mid-dial. "Maria," he said gently, his voice carrying none of the anger that everyone expected. "Are you hurt? Did any of the hot coffee splash on you?" The question seemed to confuse Maria, as if the concept of someone in Marcus's position being concerned about her well-being was incomprehensible. "No, sir, I'm fine. But your suit, I've ruined your beautiful suit. I'm so clumsy. I should have been more careful." Marcus began to remove his jacket, moving slowly and deliberately as every person in the room watched in stunned silence. "Accidents happen, Maria. The suit can be replaced. What matters is that you're not injured." He draped the stained jacket over the back of his chair and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms marked with small scars from his youth, reminders of a time when he had worked construction jobs to pay for college. "Ah, sir, we can handle this," Richard interjected, his tone carrying the barely concealed irritation of someone who believed that important people shouldn't waste time on trivial matters. "I'll call maintenance to clean up the mess and have a replacement server sent up immediately." The word replacement hung in the air like a slap, and Marcus saw Maria flinch as if she had been physically struck. He turned to face Richard with an expression that made the COO take an involuntary step backward. "Maria is not being replaced. Richard, she's a valued member of our building staff, and she deserves our respect and understanding." Marcus then did something that no one in the room had ever seen a CEO do. He knelt down and began picking up the pieces of the broken coffee cup, his expensive Italian leather shoes now stained with coffee as he carefully gathered the porcelain fragments. The symbolism was not lost on anyone present. The image of one of America's most powerful black executives on his knees, cleaning up a mess that wasn't his fault, treating a service worker with more dignity than most of them showed their own employees. "Mr. Williams, please," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion as she tried to take the broken pieces from his hands. "You shouldn't be doing this. This is my job. You're too important." Marcus looked up at her from his position on the floor, and his smile was warm and genuine. "Maria, no one is too important to show kindness to another person. And no job is more important than treating people with dignity." He stood up, still holding the coffee-stained porcelain, and faced the room full of executives who were watching this interaction with expressions ranging from bewilderment to barely concealed disgust.
"I want everyone in this room to understand something," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire, but tempered with a compassion that few of them had ever witnessed. "Maria has been cleaning these offices for 15 years.
She arrives at 4 in the morning and works until noon, making sure that we have a clean, professional environment in which to conduct our business. She has never missed a day of work, never complained about her wages, and never asked for anything more than the opportunity to do her job with dignity." The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the distant hum of traffic from the street below and the soft whisper of the air conditioning system. Marcus could see some of his executives shifting uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing their own attitudes reflected in his words. Jennifer Walsh was staring at her hands, while Richard Blackwood's face had flushed red with what might have been embarrassment or anger. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "I want you all to know that Maria is working 2 jobs to support her grandson, who has cerebral palsy. She sends money to her daughter in El Salvador every month, and she has been saving for 3 years to bring her family to the United States legally. This woman embodies the values of hard work and sacrifice that built this country, and she deserves our admiration, not our condescension." Maria's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at Marcus with an expression of wonder, as if she couldn't believe that someone in his position knew anything about her life, much less cared about her struggles. The truth was that Marcus made it his business to know about the people who worked in his building, from the security guards to the maintenance staff to the cleaning crew. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be judged by the color of his skin or the size of his bank account, and he had vowed never to make others feel that way. "Now," Marcus said, turning back to Maria with a gentle smile, "I believe we were interrupted in the middle of your work. Please don't let us keep you any longer. And Maria, thank you for everything you do to make this place feel like home." As Maria gathered her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave, Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. "Maria, I want you to call this number tomorrow morning. It's my personal assistant. I'd like to discuss a position in our company's facilities management department with full benefits and a salary that reflects the value of your contributions." The card trembled in Maria's hands as she stared at it, unable to speak through her tears. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Thank you, Mr. Williams. God bless you." After Maria left the conference room, the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marcus could see his executives processing what they had just witnessed, some with newfound respect, others with barely concealed resentment at being lectured about their treatment of service workers. He knew that this moment would define not just the rest of the meeting, but the culture of his company going forward. "I know some of you are wondering why I chose to handle that situation the way I did," Marcus said, retaking his seat at the head of the table. "Let me tell you a story that might help explain." He paused, looking out the window at the city skyline, remembering a time when those gleaming towers had seemed as unreachable as the stars. "When I was 12 years old, my mother worked as a cleaning lady in an office building downtown. One evening, I was waiting for her to finish her shift when I saw her spill a cup of coffee on an executive's desk. The man screamed at her for 10 minutes, called her names I won't repeat, and threatened to have her fired. My mother, who had been working 16-hour days to keep our family together, stood there and took his abuse because she couldn't afford to lose that job." The room was completely still now, every person hanging on Marcus's words. He could see that some of them were beginning to understand the deeper implications of what had just occurred. "That night, my mother cried herself to sleep, not because of the man's words, but because she felt like she had failed us. She had been humiliated in front of her son, reduced to something less than human by someone who had never known a day of real struggle in his life. I made a promise to myself that night that if I ever had power, I would use it to lift people up, not tear them down." Richard Blackwood cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Marcus, I understand the sentiment, but we have shareholders to consider. We can't run a business based on charity and sentiment." Marcus's expression hardened slightly, and when he spoke, his voice carried the steel that had made him one of the most feared negotiators on Wall Street. "Richard, let me be very clear about something. The way we treat the people who work for us, regardless of their position, is not charity. It's good business. Maria has been loyal to this company for 15 years because she's been treated with basic respect. Our turnover rate among support staff is the lowest in the industry because we pay fair wages and provide decent benefits. That translates directly to our bottom line." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, and looked each executive in the eye. But more than that, it's who we are as human beings. I didn't build this company to become another soulless corporation that treats people like disposable resources. I built it to prove that success and compassion are not mutually exclusive." Jennifer Walsh spoke up for the first time since the incident. "Marcus, I think what you did was admirable. But some of the other executives in the building are going to see it as weakness. They'll think you're going soft." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Jennifer, anyone who thinks that showing basic human decency is a sign of weakness has never had to fight for anything real in their lives. I've been underestimated before because of the color of my skin, because of where I came from, because people assumed I didn't belong in their world. Let them think what they want. I know who I am." The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The quarterly reports and strategic planning discussions proceeded, but everyone in the room was acutely aware that they had witnessed something significant, a moment that would be talked about and remembered long after the financial numbers were forgotten. What would you do if you had the power to change someone's life with a single decision, but knew that your choice would be judged by people who might see compassion as weakness? Tell me in the comments, because the choices we make in moments like these define not just our character, but the kind of world we're building for future generations. Over the following weeks, word of the incident spread throughout the building and beyond, carried by whispered conversations and social media posts that painted Marcus in a light that many found surprising. Some praised his compassion and leadership, while others criticized him for what they saw as grandstanding and political correctness. The business press picked up the story, with some columnists questioning whether such displays of emotion were appropriate in a corporate setting. But Marcus didn't care about the criticism. He was too busy watching the transformation that was taking place within his own company. Maria had accepted the position in facilities management, and her first initiative had been to propose a comprehensive training program for all support staff, designed to help them develop skills that could lead to advancement within the company. The program was funded entirely by Williams Financial Group, and it quickly became a model that other companies began to emulate. More importantly, the culture within the company began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Executives who had previously ignored the cleaning staff began acknowledging them by name. The company cafeteria started offering the same high-quality meals to all employees, regardless of their position. A scholarship fund was established to help the children of support staff attend college, funded by voluntary contributions from the executive team. The changes weren't without resistance. Richard Blackwood continued to grumble about the cost of the new initiatives, and several board members questioned whether Marcus was losing focus on the company's core mission. There were heated discussions about the allocation of resources, with some arguing that the money spent on employee programs could be better used to increase shareholder returns. The real test came 6 months later, when Williams Financial Group was courted by a larger investment firm that offered to acquire the company for a price that would have made every shareholder wealthy beyond their dreams. The acquiring company was known for its aggressive cost-cutting measures and its practice of eliminating what it considered non-essential personnel immediately after takeovers. Marcus called a company-wide meeting to discuss the offer, gathering everyone from senior executives to maintenance workers in the building's largest conference room. The space was packed, with people standing along the walls and sitting on the floor, all waiting to hear whether their jobs would survive the potential acquisition. "I want to be completely transparent with all of you," Marcus began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We have received an offer to sell Williams Financial Group for an amount that would be financially beneficial to our shareholders. The acquiring company has an excellent reputation for maximizing profits and streamlining operations." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Marcus could see the fear in many faces. Maria was sitting in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and he could see the worry in her eyes as she contemplated the possibility of losing the job that had transformed her life. "However," Marcus continued, "I have declined their offer, not because it wasn't financially attractive, but because their business model is fundamentally incompatible with our values. They have made it clear that their first priority would be to eliminate what they consider redundant positions, which would mean laying off approximately 40% of our workforce." The relief in the room was palpable, but Marcus wasn't finished. "I want you all to understand that this decision wasn't made lightly. It means that some of our shareholders will be disappointed, and it means that we'll need to work harder to achieve the growth targets that justify their investment. But I believe that a company's true value isn't measured solely in dollars and cents. It's measured in the lives we touch, the communities we support, and the legacy we leave behind." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces that represented every level of his organization. "When I started this company, I had a vision of creating something more than just another investment firm. I wanted to build a place where people could grow, where hard work was rewarded regardless of your background, and where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. That vision is not for sale at any price." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus was focused on Maria's face, which was streaked with tears of gratitude and relief. He thought about the promise he had made to himself as a 12-year-old boy, watching his mother endure humiliation for the crime of needing to work to survive. That promise had guided every major decision of his career, and it would continue to guide him as he built a company that proved success and compassion could coexist. The story of the spilled coffee became something of a legend within Williams Financial Group, told and retold by employees who wanted to explain to newcomers what made their company different. Maria became one of the most respected members of the facilities team, eventually being promoted to Director of Employee Services, a position created specifically to ensure that every worker in the building was treated with the dignity they deserved. The incident also sparked a broader conversation within the business community about leadership, corporate responsibility, and the treatment of service workers. Marcus was invited to speak at conferences and business schools, where he shared the lessons he had learned about the true meaning of power and success. His message was simple but revolutionary, that the measure of a leader is not how they treat those who can help them, but how they treat those who cannot. Years later, when business historians looked back at the transformation of corporate culture in the early 21st century, they would point to moments like the spilled coffee incident as catalysts for change. They would note how a single act of compassion in a Manhattan conference room had rippled outward, inspiring other leaders to examine their own values and priorities. But for Marcus, the most meaningful legacy of that day was much simpler and more personal. It was the knowledge that he had kept the promise he made to his 12-year-old self, that he had used his power to lift others up rather than tear them down. It was the satisfaction of knowing that Maria's grandson would grow up in a world where his grandmother was valued and respected for her contributions, regardless of the uniform she wore or the accent in her voice. The conference room where it all happened was eventually renovated, but Marcus insisted that a small plaque be installed near the window, engraved with a simple message: "Dignity is not determined by position, but by how we treat one another." It served as a daily reminder to everyone who entered that space that true leadership is measured not by the power you wield, but by the compassion you show to those who need it most. On quiet evenings, when the building was empty except for the security guards and the cleaning crew, Marcus would sometimes walk through those halls and remember the day that changed everything. He would think about his mother, who had passed away several years earlier, but who had lived long enough to see her son build something meaningful and lasting. He would think about Maria, who had become like family to him, and about all the other invisible workers whose contributions made the corporate world possible. The spilled coffee had stained more than just a suit that day. It had stained the consciousness of everyone who witnessed it, forcing them to confront their own assumptions about worth and dignity. And in doing so, it had created something beautiful and lasting, a reminder that in a world often driven by greed and indifference, there was still room for kindness, compassion, and the revolutionary idea that every human being deserves to be treated with respect. If this story has reminded you that true strength lies not in how we exercise power over others, but in how we use our influence to create a more just and compassionate world, then share it with someone who needs to remember that small acts of kindness can have profound and lasting impact, because somewhere today, someone is waiting for a leader who will see their humanity and choose to honor it.